So we are going to go ahead and get started. This is the third webinar of our spring webinar series, and there's only one more left in the spring. It'll be in May, where we're going to be talking about the outcomes that we've seen and some of the impact that we've seen from our students since they've been in inclusive higher education. As I mentioned, you can ask your questions as we go throughout. And then at the very end of our presentation, there's a feedback form for you to fill out. And we would love that because that helps inform our information and making sure that we're getting you guys the right content. So just keep that in mind. I'll remind you at the end, but we would love your input. And then we will be sending you the video recording along with our slide deck and along with our resources that we reference in this presentation. So all of that will be in your hands by tomorrow, and you'll get an email from Elise Kramer. So quick starting point, I just want to share who IN is if you don't know already. IN is the nonprofit that exists in the state of Colorado to advocate for inclusive college programs for students with intellectual disabilities. We love what we do. We do education and outreach. We help teachers and families see that college is a possibility for their students regardless of their disabilities. We work on expansion, so providing more opportunities and more college programs. And then we also work on helping our programs track outcomes so that we can show the value of the college experience and inclusion for students of all ability levels. So this is my contact information. I want you guys to feel free to reach out to me. We want to be a resource to you as you're navigating college and options for your students. And this particular webinar is addressing several levels of disability services for students with disabilities in college. And so I know that I might be speaking to a wide range of families or educators, but please reach out if there's any clarity that I can bring as we go through this content, okay? So this will be our agenda, kind of our track record for the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to start by talking about the history of disability services. Then we're going to focus on the 3 levels of disability services that students can access in college. And I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on what those 3 levels offer. And then we'll talk about some resources that you can tap into to continue the conversation and continue learning. So our objectives are that you would understand the history of disability services in higher education, that you would be able to understand also what makes inclusive higher education for students with intellectual disability beyond compliance or above and beyond what's expected, and then identify which services you or the students you care for or educate, what they actually need. We want you to just be equipped with the resources that you can use in your specific spaces. So we're going to dive right into the history of disability services. This is not everybody's favorite. When you talk about laws, we can get lost in all the details of the laws, but I do think it's important for us to see. And I've color-coded these on purpose. So you'll see the first two that are in that light blue. These were the laws that were put in place that allowed for equal access for students to get to college if they meet the college entry criteria. So the Section 504 allowed individuals with disabilities to access college if they meet college entry criteria. And then in 1990, ADA was put in place, and that allowed, once those students are there and on the campus, they have the right to access accommodations to make the things on campus more accessible to them. So those are, when we think about college, you'll hear a lot of 504 ADA. Those are the laws that support disability access on a college campus. They're amazing. They're pivotal. We need them. And they still kept a group of individuals with disabilities out of the college experience. Those with intellectual disabilities, or maybe those that were in removed special education classrooms for most of their K-12, where they couldn't meet that college entry criteria. And a lot of those students were graduating from college or from high school and sitting at home and not doing much with their future, but we know that they can do much with their future. And so in 2008, at the national level, we said, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to create some support, some laws that allow students with intellectual disabilities access onto a college campus. So that happened nationally, where schools all across the nation were developing programs specifically for students with intellectual disabilities. That launched Think College, which is a national resource hub for this information. And you'll see several links from Think College throughout my presentation. They are a wonderful resource, and so we want you to go there. you'll see that 2008 is when we kind of cracked that door open for this next group of students with disabilities to be able to access college. But it wasn't until 8 years after that that Colorado did something about it. So it was in 2016 that Colorado said, hey, that is a really good idea. We have students that need these services and can grow in so many ways when they access college. And so we launched our first pilot programs in the state of Colorado in 2016. We started with ACC in Littleton, UNC in Greeley, and UCCS in Colorado Springs. And today I get to share with you about 8 programs that exist now because of this work. So we continued getting legislation to support these things because we believe in them and we've seen the outcomes of students. So I just want you guys to kind of see this progression that the higher education landscape wants to serve students with diverse needs. And we have created programs and supports that can be a guide and an assistance to them so that they can be successful in these spaces. So I'm going to talk, before I get into some of those levels of different supports, I'm just going to talk very broadly about some of the key differences that we're going to see when students go, especially students with disabilities, go from high school into college. Hopefully none of these are a shock, but they're just good reminders for us to have. So students in high school, they are being served under IDEA. That is what provides their special education services. And the language under IDEA is that they will provide services to ensure students' success. It's very success driven. Whereas in college, you're going to see the ADA and 504 is very access driven. They are not going to guarantee the success of a student. Those laws and the services that are in place are guaranteeing equal access. We are guaranteeing that students with disabilities can participate in these things, but it's going to be up to them to utilize additional services as needed to be successful. So that's a big language change. The supports are still in place, but they look different and they might have a different tone to them. Students in high school have access to accommodations and modifications, oftentimes provided by their IEP team with very little awareness on the student side. I've seen lots of students coming from K-12 and they don't know what accommodations they need or what modifications they need because it's just provided. That is not the case in higher education. No matter what level you're receiving support from, students need to be aware and self-advocate for their accommodations and their needs. I only put on this slide accommodations because apart from inclusive higher education programs, which are very unique programs, apart from those, students with disabilities in college only have access to accommodations. They do not modify course content for these students. And so that can be a pretty big shift for our students coming from the K-12 world. In high school, their days are structured. A bell tells them where to go, right? In college, there's a lot more downtime, which could be beautiful and could be dangerous if we don't have any experience with that. So that's a big piece just to consider, that students don't tend to have a back-to-back schedule like they do in high school. There doesn't tend to be much or as much student choice in high school, but in college, it is the student drives the bus. The student is making the choices that they want, and then therefore they're receiving or experiencing the consequences, good or bad, of those choices. In high school, parents are seen as the primary advocate, asking for services, advocating for those services as they should be. In college, what we try to help parents see is you're shifting from your advocate role into an advisor role. You now get to be advising your student to be the advocate. If you have a concern, talking with your student directly to be the advocate for those services on campus, that is kind of passing the baton for them to be as independent as possible. Parents are going to receive all communication in high school. That is not always the case in college. We say things, nothing about the student without the student. So I've had parents email me several times about concerns about their student. That's allowed. You're allowed to have a concern. I'm not going to communicate about the concern unless the student's involved because I want them to know about that concern. So that student gets CC'd right away. So the students are always going to be involved. As I mentioned, they drive the bus. And I put a release of information. Those ROIs are essential. So no matter what disability services you use, students who are attending the institution have to provide like a proof of agreement to the institution that they're okay with you being involved in their academics. They're okay with information being shared with you, but never without them. So ROIs or release of information forms are going to be very common at the college level. Most services in high school are free. And I would say in college, they really try to make support services free, but there is definitely more of a fee-based model. And that is a big shift from our K-12 experience. Students who have high needs have this specialized instruction when they're in K-12. And the difference from having like one case manager that knows your needs and meets your needs however you need them in college, they're going to still have similar needs, but they're empowered to access different supports across campus to kind of collaboratively meet their needs, where you don't just have one case manager, but you know somebody in the advising office, and you know somebody in the disability office, and you know somebody in the career office, where you're utilizing organic support and not reliant on one individual. So those are some of the big key differences. There's a link right here to a Think College chart that kind of breaks those down even further. I do want to point out, no matter what level of service that you receive, a 504 plan or an IEP are great pieces of information to bring to college to provide to disability services staff. They are not automatically transferred over or transferable to college, meaning a student can't take a 504 to one of their professors and say, give me these accommodations. Faculty have no idea what a 504 is. That is not the world they come from. They have no idea what to do with an IEP. And I'm going to explain that a little bit later. 504s and IEPs are like historical academic documentation for students that should inform the services that they receive at college, but they are not automatically the document utilized in college. And that's a really big, important piece for some of our students and families to understand. So as I mentioned, I'll share a little bit more as we dive into these levels of support. Does anybody want to stop me before I get into our levels? I know I can get excited, so we keep going. Okay, I'm going to keep on rolling. If questions come up, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. So what I want to speak to of levels of support. When we talk about students with disabilities going to college, there's a wide range of students with disabilities and need that they would have when it comes to support. So I want you to know all of the various options available to you so that you can select which one is best for your family, your students, etc. So we're going to talk about three. At the base level, foundational. This is an outcome of those first laws, the 504 and the ADA, is what we refer to as traditional disability services. This is expected and required at every single institution of higher education. How that looks may be a little bit different, but by and large, they operate very similarly. And so we'll talk about that first. That's going to serve the biggest group of students with disabilities. A lot of times it's going to be those students that had 504s in high school. I'm thinking learning disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health disabilities, all those things. They can accommodate a lot of that. So they're going to serve a wide range. Then the next narrow piece would be supplemental services. So maybe students can access the support from disability services, but they need a little bit more when it comes to social engagement or planning or goal setting. That's where supplemental services come in. Not every single student with a disability is going to need that. Typically, we see students with autism spectrum disorder fitting into that bucket, where they can access the supports from disability services, but they need a little bit more social guidance. And then the very top of this pyramid serves the smallest amount of students, but has the most amount of support. That's inclusive higher education. Those are programs designated for students with intellectual disabilities. So that's kind of our path. We're going to start with traditional disability services. I'll talk about the in-between supplemental services, and then we'll talk about inclusive higher education. Yes, I see a hand up.
Sí, buenas tardes. No sé si es por la señal, pero creo que como que la interpretación va como muy rápido y a veces pierdo algunos conceptos. Si, no sé, como les digo, si es la señal o si podrían ir un poco más despacio, por favor. Gracias.
Got it. Thank you so much. All righty. Okay, so I'm going to speak now just to that foundational level, disability service basics. So as I mentioned, this is legally mandated or required at all colleges or institutions of higher education. They're going to have a dedicated staff person or a dedicated office that works specifically with students with disabilities. A lot of times those are going to be called disability services or access services. Sometimes those terms are interchangeable. They're going to serve a variety of students with a variety of disabilities. So as I mentioned, that might be physical, might be mental health, could be chronic, could be a lot of different things. They're going to serve a wide range. Students receiving these services have to be traditionally admitted students. So they have to meet your college entry criteria, and they have to be degree seeking. They have to be pursuing a credential at the institution to receive their support. And this is a big shift from high school is they will only receive, if they're receiving disability services, they will only receive accommodations in college. So they're not going to be able to modify or adapt assignments or expectations of the courses. They're only going to be able to accommodate how they show their learning. So for example, if you're in an intro to communication class and everybody is having to complete a 5-page paper, students with accommodations might have extended time to complete that 5-page paper. They might have the option to use assistive technology to dictate their 5-page paper, but they still have to complete the 5-page paper. So that is really important to know when you are using only disability services, you can only receive academic accommodations. And as I mentioned before, that 504 letter and that IEP document do not transfer automatically. Instead, you're going to bring those to the Disability Services office, and they will talk with you about what you need, and then they're going to create a new letter of accommodation. That letter of accommodation is from the institution. That's what professors will know, they'll understand, and it's very specific to college. So I talked a little bit about this, but it's important to hit home of what do accommodations look like, just so that we're making sure we're understanding it. They do not alter what students learn. Students are expected to learn the same things as the peers in their class. Accommodations alter how they show that learning. And ultimately, it's to prepare them for the workforce and expectations that exist there. Accommodations at the college level can be in the classroom. It could be things as simple as having a designated seat to be in the front of the classroom if you're hearing impaired, or to use assistive technology, or to have a note taker support. So lots of different classroom options. You could also have testing options where you have a testing center where you can receive your tests and take them with extended time, or to take them in chunks, different things like that, or housing accommodations that can include emotional support animals or being independent in an apartment instead of with roommates, different things. So accommodations can cover all of those areas. And oftentimes your accommodations are going to be similar to the ones that you received in high school, but they're not always going to be the exact same. So students are going to go through a process or a conversation with somebody from Disability Services to say, this is what I received in high school. This is what helped me. This is what didn't. What's going to be appropriate here? And that'll be an interactive process. Okay, so in order to access disability services at the college level, students have to self-disclose. Nobody's going to come after you saying, hey, I think you have a disability. Students have to go to the office and say, I have a disability and I need support. They're going to have to provide disability documentation. This differs across each institution, but by and large, you're looking for documentation that's either medical or from your educational background that clearly states a diagnosis. That's what the disability services are looking for, clearly stated diagnosis. That can come from an IEP or a 504, but sometimes schools are going to require medical documentation. And sometimes they're going to require that it's as recent as 3 years. So those are important things to think about with your students as you're talking now of, do we need to go back to our doctors and get an updated letter outlining what your diagnoses are or what your needs are. But I would say I've seen more colleges move towards accepting IEPs and 504s as documentation, but it's not always. And as I mentioned, you're going to go through an interactive process. So you're going to discuss your educational background, what you need, what helps you, what doesn't help you. They're going to talk through appropriate accommodations with you. You'll receive that new letter. And then here's another big step for our students. It is oftentimes the student's responsibility to provide that accommodation letter to their professors. Some schools have it where they automatically email that out to all of their professors. That's a lovely system. Not all schools do. Some schools expect students to email it directly to the professors as a way to advocate and communicate and be clear, and take ownership of their educational needs. So that's a big thing that oftentimes is different from high school as well. Students take ownership of sharing that information with their faculty. What that means is that students can choose to use accommodations or not. There might be a class where they feel that they don't need to use accommodations, and so they don't communicate that to their professors, and they have that choice. I lean towards always implementing accommodations, because they're there for a reason, but we do want our students to have the ownership in that space. Okay, important things to note from the disability services level, that base level of disability services. Sometimes it takes a long time to get this set up. So what I don't want is students to go to college, choose their classes, be ready to start on Monday, and they don't go to the disability services until their first exam 3 weeks from now. We want this to be very proactive. You want to go early on because they're going to be asking for documentation, setting up an appointment with you, talking with you about your needs. So it can take some time, and we encourage going early and being proactive. We also encourage having open communication with the disability staff. This shouldn't be just a one-stop shop where you get your accommodation letter and then you walk away. They should offer ongoing appointments and support as you navigate the challenges of higher education, and they should be there as an advocate for you. So you, as a student, or the students that you serve, should be able to go to see the same counselor or coordinator in the disability services office so that they can help you through the learning curve that is college. Also, your accommodation letter is going to be a living, breathing document. So if you're in a class and you're learning that you need more than what you thought you did, you have the opportunity to go back to disability services and say, hey, let's talk through this scenario. I think I need a different accommodation, another accommodation, and they can walk through that with you. So it's not something that has to be set in stone at the beginning of the semester. You can always continually advocate. There are going to be some procedures for accommodations, mainly when it comes to testing. And when I say procedures, I mean filling out a form in advance if you're going to take a test in the testing center. That requires some additional executive functioning and planning ahead and setting reminders. So each institution is going to have different policies for those, and that's important to ask when you're meeting with the Disability Services Office. So yes, testing center requests, making sure we're doing things in an appropriate time. For example, even getting accommodations in an appropriate time. Some students might hear that they have an exam tomorrow and try to go get accommodations. You're likely not going to be able to get those set up in time for your exam. And so you're going to have to take that first exam without accommodations. But if you're early and you're thinking of that timeliness, then you should be in good shape for any of your assignments or exams that come up. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this just for the sake of time, but I do want you to know that what you'll hear at the college level is there are both rights and responsibilities of the students, rights and responsibilities of the faculty. So students have the right to advocate for their needs, the right to receive appropriate accommodations, but they're also going to be held to responsibilities like following the code of conduct, and meeting the essential requirements of those courses, and being the one that provides the accommodation letter. We can't assume we're going to receive these services without proving your need of those services to your professors. And on the flip side, staff have the right to receive that accommodation letter as proof of their need for accommodation to you. And they have the right to contact the disability services if they have questions, but ultimately, their responsibility is that they treat students with disabilities like anybody else, that there is no bias, that they are supporting them holistically. Their responsibility is to actually implement those approved accommodations and maintain confidentiality. So it is never appropriate for faculty to know or share about a disability. That's up to the student to know or share. The faculty and the staff are simply there to provide the accommodations that are necessary for your access. So that's just a little tidbit of rights and responsibilities. Before I get into the supplemental services, that next layer of support, does anybody have questions for me about disability services? Beautiful. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing shaking heads. Still tracking. Okay. So supplemental services, students that need supplemental services are still going to access disability services, just like I mentioned. They'll go through that interactive process, receive their accommodation letter, but oftentimes these are the students that need some of that social engagement, peer mentor engagement, goal setting, planning. And so they'll often go to an office that offers these supplemental services, which varies greatly across programs. There's not like one set model for these programs, but oftentimes what they offer are things like academic coaching, where you can have one-on-one time with an educator helping you kind of break down the pieces of your assignments, understand what you're learning in your lectures. They might have peer mentors that can support you with homework, going to class, going around campus socially. And then they might have designated times to build skills. These might be workshops, additional classes, where they help you with skills in career readiness or social engagement or goal setting. So those tend to be the types of services that come along with supplemental services. Students receiving supplemental services still have to be traditionally admitted students. So they have to meet that college entry criteria. They also have to be degree seeking. So this is still very much a similar group of people that's served by disability services. And as I mentioned, very commonly, we see students with autism really thrive with these additional supplemental services. So there's not much else I can go into detail just because they're so varied, but I do want to mention that oftentimes there are fees associated with this supplemental service level because it's not required by law. It's something above and beyond. So here are the examples that we know of in the state of Colorado that we refer to as supplemental. So CSU has a program called Opportunities for Post-Secondary Success, very peer mentor academic coaching model. DU has the Learning Effectiveness Program, which I think is also more academic coaching, somebody sitting down and breaking your assignments down for you and with you. MSU has a program that's referred to as the Isaac program, specifically with social engagement for students with autism. And then MSU Denver also has an academic coaching program. So those are the ones that we know of that exist in colleges. We also know of some external groups that we refer to as supplemental. Untapped Learning is a wonderful remote support that can be a support for students at any institution of higher ed. They offer virtual peer mentoring, coaching, and tutoring. They primarily serve students with autism, but they work with various student needs, and they have been really wonderful. The college living experience offers living instruction and independent living skill development for students who want to pursue college. They also have a really wonderful, robust programming that they offer. I will note that's one of the highest dollar marks that we've seen for supplemental services is that college living experience because it's a little bit more involved because they're supporting students with living in an apartment or in a dorm. So those are our supplemental services in the state of Colorado. And then I think where most of you are, if you've heard about IN for a while, then you're aware of these inclusive higher education programs. So what I want to do is speak to how these go above and beyond and who these serve specifically, because ultimately we want you as educators and parents and students to feel confident in the type of service that you're pursuing in college so that you can be as successful in your future as possible. So inclusive higher education, top of the pyramid, serving the smallest amount of students, but having the most robust supports. This is only offered at select institutions. In the state of Colorado, we have 8 programs, which is wonderful since 2016. These provide an alternative admission pathway, which essentially means that students don't have to meet your traditional college entry criteria. Students in inclusive higher education apply to the inclusive higher education program and then become an admitted student at the college. So they get to bypass that typical admission process. That does not mean, however, that it's an easy admission process. It is actually very more involved in a lot of ways. And I'll speak to that in a couple of slides. Within inclusive higher education, students have inclusive courses. So these are not special education programs on a college campus. These are programs that provide supports to ensure that students are engaging and being included across the campus. So they're going to be in inclusive courses. They're going to participate in inclusive clubs and events, just like any college student. The big shift here is this allows students with intellectual disabilities primarily access to accommodation and modification. This is the only time that you will have modifications available to you at the college level. So my narrative for families and students that are trying to figure out what type of service do they need, which level is best for them. If you have had modification in all of your academic coursework through K-12, it is very common that you would require modification to your college coursework in order to fully engage with it. So those are the students that we want to serve. Go ahead. Accommodation. Mhm. Absolutely. Yep. So I'm going to go back to a 5-page paper as an example. If the assignment is a 5-page paper, an accommodation would be using assistive technology to dictate that 5-page paper. They still have to turn in the 5-page paper at the same time as everybody else. A modification would be instead of a 5-page paper, the student's going to work really hard on a 1-page paper. Or the student's going to turn in a PowerPoint slide deck showing what they've learned from the readings instead of full paragraphs in a paper. Those tend to be very common modifications that we see within these programs, but all of them are going to be very individualized to the student's cognitive level. Let me know if that is helpful, Hilda, or if you want others. Perfect. I love it. Thank you. So because of those modifications, if students are receiving modified assignments or completing, modified assignments in their courses, then they're not going to earn the same level of degree as students that are not receiving modifications. So our students in inclusive higher education are not going to earn a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree. Instead, within these programs, they are earning a certificate credential. That is still something that comes from the college. They still have a transcript. They still are challenged in so many ways, but it notes on their transcript that some of their classes were modified. What that does is still allows our students to communicate to future employers classes that they took, skills that they learned, even if they don't have this high level of degree, they can still show proof of growth in skills and specific courses that prepared them to be employable in the sector that they want. And I'll speak a little bit more to the certificate. We have an example of them in these slides. There are going to be program fees across these programs. They vary greatly. You guys will hear no matter what, community colleges are far more financially feasible and a great place to start than four-year universities, but they don't have the on-campus living piece, and that can be so pivotal. So you'll see just kind of a wide range of program fees associated with inclusive higher ed. But ultimately, those program fees support all of the guidance and additional staff and peer mentor support that exists in what we call 4 pillars or 4 domains. So when I think of inclusive higher education, I think of supports that exist for students in these 4 areas. So first is academics, which is what we talk about the most. Those inclusive courses, modifications, earning a certificate. They have a lot of support in person-centered planning to determine what are their goals, what classes are going to be the best bet for them and their future career goals. They also have support socially. They're going to have peer mentors be able to go with them to clubs or frat parties or all the things that are encompassed in college life. They can have peer mentors naturally there to support them rather than a para-educator following them around. And that really helps them build a confidence in their social participation, and sets them up for success in the future. They're also going to receive career supports. There's a progression of career development. They might start in their first year with career exploration, where they're taking assessments or they're exploring different job fields. And then they're going to move into a time where they're doing internships on campus or in the community, learning about different fields. And then ideally, they're placed in paid employment, oftentimes part-time, either on campus or out in the community, based on what they're interested in and based on the skills that they've built up during their time in the program. And then there's also, no matter if there is on-campus housing or not, there's a focus on developing independent skills. So all of our programs, students are going to be taking inclusive courses, typically 2 to 3 courses each semester. So a smaller pace so that they can give it their all. But there tends to be one additional course that's just taught by the inclusive higher education program. And this is where they're going to be focused on those independent living skills, money management, food preparation, all of those things that our students just need more explicitly. They're going to have that each semester as well. So when we think of inclusive higher education, we're thinking big picture, whole picture student, not just academic success, but all of these pieces so that we are graduating students to be as independent as possible. So the orientation process or the application process is going to be separate from the typical institution. So again, students don't apply traditionally through the institution. They're going to apply to the program. That is often an online application. They're going to have person-centered planning with the program staff. So there is going to be, in a lot of ways, similar to a case manager, somebody that really sits down from the program saying, what do you want to do with your life in these 4 areas? And how can I help you get there? And that is something that's going to drive all of the supports that they receive. They're going to talk about their career goal, what they want to study and why, what courses are going to be best for that. They'll also have access to those peer mentors, and coordinating a schedule for them. A lot of times, peer mentors meet with students before they go to class to help them prepare, maybe reread some components of their textbook, and then they could be with them during class if needed, though that is not constant. That's not for every student. And then they might meet with them after class to review what was just said in that lecture. What did you learn in that group discussion? So that there's kind of this constant checking in on what we're learning together. They'll go with social events and housing support. So students that are living on campus, peer mentors might be assigned to go support them with house tours or roommate support, just kind of those nitty-gritty things that we need additional guidance on. They're still going to engage in an interactive process. It's just not going to be in the Disability Services office. Instead, it's going to be with the Inclusive Higher Education office and staff. And that's where they're going to determine all the supports that are necessary for them. So this was one thing that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure we all are on the same page with it when we talk about modifications at the college level with inclusive higher education. A reminder that accommodations only alter how learning happens or is shown, but they have to meet the same learning expectations. Modifications can alter what learning happens or how much learning happens. So these are some more examples if this is helpful for you all in the classroom. A limited length of assignment, so 1 page instead of 5, or a graphic organizer that you're filling out instead of writing down an entire page, right? It's something where it kind of chunks it out for students. Testing might include fewer questions on the exam, It might even include rewording or simplifying the wording of the exam questions. And it might even include somebody asking the questions to the student to provide some guidance and narrative understanding. And in housing, it's not really considered a modification, but it might include having an additional RA or an additional peer mentor support you if there's increased needs. So really modifications allow us to take any college content and have students fully participate in discussions and readings, but when they're showing what they're learning, it's at their cognitive level. So here is an example of the certificate that students receive. So this is from Arapahoe Community College. The certificates are called comprehensive higher education certificates, where students get to choose an area of study that's offered at the institution. So they're going to have a few, typically half, of their credits are going to be required general education. But these are specific, they're not your typical general education like math and reading. These are general education courses that we believe are really valuable for our students with intellectual disabilities to be able to market themselves out in the community and to be employable and to be independent. So some of the examples of required courses include there's a few ones on here like advanced academic achievement. So these are practices for students to be successful in their college courses. There is a basic reading and writing, not because they have to know how to nail a 10-page paper, but because they're going to have to communicate via email with their employers, things like that, where they're just learning those basic structures of writing and communication. Intro to PC applications, so being able to use a computer, because that's pretty much necessary in any job these days. Interpersonal communication, learning how to communicate with different people around you. And then marketing your image is resume development, interview practice, all of those things for career readiness. All the other courses, the other half of that certificate, students get to choose what classes are going to help them build up skills to be ready for the job that they want. The beauty of this certificate is that students don't have to stay in one pathway, only medical or only education. They're allowed to choose from across different areas of study. So for example, we had a student whose career goal was to be a photographer and to run his own photography business. I think lots of students would dream about that, but they don't realize how hard that can be and how many pieces to the puzzle there are. So in his person-centered planning with his inclusive higher education staff, they determined, let's get you classes that are going to help you build up not just photography skills, but business skills and finance skills so that you can manage all of these things and invoices when they come in. And so he took courses from finance and from business and from their arts program with photography. And so this certificate allows students to be very intentional about what skills they're learning so that they can be marketable when they graduate. So important to note, even with modifications, because I know at the K-12 level, modifications can look like a lot of different things. Even with modifications in these programs, we are ensuring that students are challenged in ways they have rarely been challenged in K-12, because students are capable of growing academically no matter what their disability is. And so we operate on this foundation of presuming competence or believing that our students are capable of hard things and figuring out how we provide supports to get them to that accomplishment. So there is increased responsibility, increased expectation. And what we see is when we set the bar high, students reach it. They're capable of reaching it and doing really hard things. It's always going to be student driven. Our students are the ones earning this education, developing skills for employment, driving the bus for their lives, and we want to keep that forefront. High expectations, as I mentioned, and even faded support models. So what I mean by this is we might have students who start in their first semester in inclusive higher education and require a peer mentor to go with them to class because maybe they don't know how to engage in discussion, or maybe they have some difficulty with focus. But ultimately, what we'd love to see is how can we fade that away over time? By the time that they're a junior or a senior, how have they built up skills to be able to navigate those challenges with independence? So we don't want this to be inclusive higher education where we provide all these different crutches. The supports are not crutches. The supports are essential for their growth and their development. And then when able, we allow them to kind of take those away and see how they can soar and see how they can grow on their own. It is so important to begin these conversations early, to talk with IEP teams about having high expectations now, and providing this as an option early on for students to begin thinking about, because we know that it's a big thing to think about. So I'm going to speak to all of the programs, the inclusive higher education programs in the state of Colorado, and then we'll pause for questions because I know I've been talking at you for a while. So UCCS in Colorado Springs, they were one of our first. They are a 4-year program with on-campus living. So they have apartments that students live with other peers from the program. And they also have students that are living off campus after they've kind of developed those skills to be more independent, which is great. And they are one of the very few, one of 3 right now, I believe, in the nation that is an accredited inclusive higher education program, which means they are doing a lot of work to serve students in all of those 4 pillars and really setting the bar high. Elevate at ACC, that's in Littleton, Colorado. They are a 3-year program, so you earn their certificate in 3 years. They are a commuter campus. It's a community college, so no on-campus living. Some students love that, some students hate that. But that is a really wonderful option when it comes to financial feasibility. The Global Inclusive Program is at Regis University in Denver. This one is a variation of years. You can earn a certificate in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. So it's really based on what the student and family needs. They have on-campus dorms and apartments, I believe, and a really beautiful campus. And then UNC in Greeley, Colorado, they are a 4-year program and they have your traditional dorms on campus. And their program is called GOAL, Go On and Learn. So these are the kind of founding programs in the state of Colorado. I do want to point out at the bottom, lots of jargon, but here's what this means. CTP is the Comprehensive Transition and Post-Secondary Program Status. That's like a designation that these programs received from the Federal Department of Ed. And when they have a CTP designation, it means that students, even though they're not traditionally degree seeking, can access federal financial aid. So when you're in these certificate seeking programs, you can still complete your FAFSA and receive federal grants and work study funds. Because it's a modified credential and not degree seeking, there is not access to federal loans. So there are some other ways to think about paying for the cost of college that I'll share with you about too. But CTP status is really what you want to know that you have access to federal financial aid. And then all of these programs have the same layout of their certificate so that there's transferability of that. We've had a student go from ACC to UNC, completing their certificate there. But also that just shows there's a weight to this certificate when more and more schools and more programs are providing it similarly for all their students. And then most recently, we've had 4 new jump in. So now RAM Scholars, which is at CSU in Fort Collins, their program is a 3-year program and very specific to experiential learning or agriculture trade. So we have students in that program who are interested in working with cattle or animals of a wide variety or plants, because that just meets a career need in that area. So a very cool and unique program. MSU Denver, in the heart of Denver at the Auraria campus. Theirs is a 4-year program with a commuter campus. They do not have housing for their students in this program. And they have really wonderful courses that develop academic readiness and social engagement across their campus, all completely inclusive courses. Cultivate at Lamar Community College is like Southeast Colorado. We're so excited for them to be there. They'll be launching this fall. Very trade focused school. Lots of different trades that students can access there. Similar to Aspire at Pikes Peak State College in Colorado Springs. Theirs will be a commuter campus as well, and theirs will be a 3-year program with lots of option for trade-based work. They are in the process of earning their CTP. So these programs don't yet have that financial aid access, but they are developing those same certificates. So here's what I say about this, about inclusive higher education, about students with intellectual disabilities going to college. The bar has been set high. This is a quote we love from Ginger, a mom of a UCCS student. The bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives have been changed. So when we set that bar high, no matter what student needs are, we see that they reach it and they can accomplish great things. So as I wrap up with these 3 levels of disability services, these are kind of check boxes for you to consider. The student that I serve or work with in my school, the kiddo that I have, I want to make sure that I'm providing them with the right service and that we're pursuing the right service. So for traditional disability services, does your student meet college entry criteria? Do they want an associate's degree or higher? Can they be successful with accommodations at the college level? If so, traditional disability services is your go-to. Does your student meet traditional college entry criteria, want to earn an associate's degree, can use accommodations, but might require social guidance or executive functioning guidance? Supplemental services is going to be your level. Does your student not typically meet college entry criteria, have an intellectual disability, require modification, but also have a passion to grow and learn and be successful? Inclusive higher education is going to be your service. So that's kind of just a breakdown where you can kind of check off the boxes. Where does my student fit and what's going to be the best bet for them? So I know there's lots of resources at the back end of this slide deck, but I want to leave it open for any questions that have come up for me about any of those levels, any additional resources I can provide. That's okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, wonderful. I will say we have a few extra resources on our website. So I'm going to click through these really quick just so you guys can see. This isn't a resource as much as it is just an encouragement that no matter what your role is, student, parent, educator, you are an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to post-secondary success. These are some handouts that I think will be helpful based on our topic tonight. The first one is those levels broken down. It gives kind of those big chunks and then links to the programs. That one on the right is specific to inclusive higher education programs, where you can find out a bit more about each of the 8 that exist in Colorado. And then we have 3 handouts talking about different ways to consider preparing for college. It's not just the academic piece, though that's important. How are students thinking about self-advocacy? Do they know what their disability needs are? Do they know how to navigate between classes with independence? Things like that to start addressing with your IEP teams or over the summer is a great way to start. And then we also have preparation for some of our students that are younger. We believe that college preparation starts in pre-K. We should be asking these questions, challenging families, challenging special educators. So this gives some chunks of age groups and different ways to be preparing. And then we have an entire website that is all these resources in Spanish. So you can click on this and access this all in Spanish. These are resources from the National Think College. They are a wealth of information, and I highly encourage going to those. And then these are more direct links to INS resources. We have webinars each fall and spring. We do a mentorship program if students want to come hear from other students that have been on a college campus that are like them and see what college would look like. Newsletters, student stories, hopefully all of the things that you guys are in need of. If you are in need of more, if you have specific questions, you can always contact myself or Elise Kramer, my colleague, and we'd be happy to get you the information you need. I'm going to leave that there. If anybody needs to run, please run. I'm happy to hang tight if there are any questions that are lingering. But thank you so much for joining me on your Wednesday evening.